Hello, friends, and welcome back to my lecture titled Environmental Concerns, Eco-Criticism, and Indian English Literature. Uh, I'm sorry I have not mentioned it over here, but this is the part 3 and the last part of my lecture. Uh, in the earlier two parts, in part 1, I had discussed with you the environmental concerns, the environmental degradation, as we are experiencing in the last 50 years, more and more in the last 50 years. And then the part 2 was on eco-criticism, the definition, and what all ensues in eco-criticism. So now the part 3 is about the ecological concerns that we perceive in our Indian English literature. So I would like to begin with a quotation from Lynn White Jr. And when you read this quotation, you would understand what I'm trying to say over here. And in his article, Historical Roots of Our Ecologic Crisis, he states that Christianity inherited from Judaism not only a concept of time as non-repetitive and linear, but also a striking story of creation. By gradual stages, a loving and all-powerful God had created light and darkness, the heavenly bodies, the earth, and all its plants, animals, birds, and fishes. Finally, God had created Adam and, as an afterthought, Eve to keep man from being lonely. Man named all the animals, thus establishing his dominance over them. God planned all of this explicitly for man's benefit and rule. No item in the physical creation had any purpose save to serve man's purposes, and although man's body is made of clay, he is not simply part of nature, he is made in God's image. So Lynn White Jr. basically blames the creation of human being by God, the Christianity, for purporting or for upholding the supremacy of man in the society. And as you all know the story of Genesis, it says that God created the world in 6 days. He created everything, then he created man, and then out of the ribs of man he created woman, and for 6 days, and then he rested on the 7th day, which we celebrate as Sunday. So Lynn White Jr. basically blames Christianity or the story of Genesis for this, because he says that all this points out that God created all the animals, the birds, the environment for the consumption of man. And the eco-feminists also confirm with this, because the story says that the woman was created out of the ribs of man. So they say that the woman, as well as the eco-feminists, they say that the women and nature are put in one category under the patriarchal man society. Now, in contrast to what Christianity says, we have a different concept here in India. The Indian philosophy talks of the human beings as well as the natural world having, they are a part of that bigger soul that we term as God. And to prove my point, I have taken in translation this poem, which you can call as the peace poem from the Yajurveda, which in translation it states, "May there be peace in the skies, peace in the atmosphere, peace on earth, peace in the waters, May the healing plants and trees bring peace. May there be peace on and from the world, the deity. May there be peace in the world, peace on peace. May that peace come to me. So this I have taken from Yajurveda. And as you can see, the paramount feature in the above prayer is the desire for peace for the self is the last priority, unlike the idea from Genesis, where the man is the ultimate and the other creations are for him and from him. So our philosophy believes that every living and alive entity, including the trees and plants, have a soul within, the soul which is a part of the preponderant soul of the Almighty God, and hence proposes respect for all, irrespective of any external or internal discrimination. Nature is divine in our culture and is to be worshipped. And thus, perhaps this is the reason that we associate many animals with the gods and goddesses, either as their avatars or as their carriers, to ensure that they are considered as sacred. A move perhaps undertaken to, prohibits the people from exploiting them. Just for example, I would, take the 24 avatars of Lord Vishnu. Kurma avatar, reincarnation as a tortoise, Matsya avatar as a fish, Vara avatar as a boar, and so many others. So not only the animate nature, but the inanimate nature is also revered in our tradition. The river is a mother, and the planets are godly existence. We have termed them as gods. Had we been following these ideals today, we would not have been facing the environmental exigencies that we are facing today, because we have been following the Western concept of development. I would come over to Ramchandra Guha as well, who says things, who terms things in the same tune, and he also blames the industrialization for what we are suffering from today. Another concept of Indian philosophy which talks of the 5 elements in nature, which I have mentioned over here: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And everywhere in the philosophy you would find that a perfect balance of all these things is required for harmony in our system, in our ecosystem. So that needs to be, taken into consideration. Okay. Coming over to some notable environment movements of India, which you must be knowing. Some of them are very well known, some of them are not so known to us, but we must be knowing, because literatures have been written on these movements in fictional works as well. The reference to these movements have been presented. So, first of all, I would like to discuss the Bishnoi movement. Bishnois are a community basically from Rajasthan, and you might be knowing them from the Black Buck incidents, in which a black buck was killed in Rajasthan during a film shooting, and an actor was implicated in all these things, and the Bishnoi community, they filed a case against the well-known actor. So they are very much grounded in the environment, and they can be considered as the biggest protectors of the ecology. So this movement in 1730, this happened in Khejarli village, and this happened because the Maharaja of Jodhpur wanted to make a new palace for himself, and he wanted the forest surrounding the Khejarli village, which constituted of khejri trees, to be cleared. He sent his soldiers to clear the forest and for making a palace for himself. So in 1730, this movement was started by Amrita Devi, and they started Hug the Tree movement, as was done in the Chipko movement. And Amrita Devi stated that a chopped head is cheaper than a felled tree. So you can see how much importance the trees were given by this community. And in this uprising, in this movement, 363 people were killed. Later, when the Maharaja came to know of the killings of people, he came to the village and he sought for their apology, and then he came out with a stricture that this area is going to be a protected area, which the law still stands, and that area is a protected area. Then we all know about the Chipko movement, which was pioneered in 1973 by Sundar Lal Bahuguna and Chandi Prasad Bhatt. He is an important figure. These two were important figures in this movement, and this was done to save the trees in the Himalayan region. And it is to be noted here that lots and lots of women participated in this movement, and the eco-feminists, they also talk about the connection of women, the closer connection of women with nature, and they also say that the women are the women are closer to nature. And whenever there has been an uprising to save or to conserve the ecology, women are the leaders for all this. Then there is one movement again. It happened in 1983. This is called Apiko movement in the village Salkani, and this was started by Pandurang Hegde. And this was done to save the rest of the tropical forests in the Western Ghats region, which were being cleared for hydroelectric projects. And this movement, again, they tried to hug the trees, and they came out with retaliation on this move. And they talk of Ubsu, Belisu, and Balasu. Ubsu means to grow, Belisu means to save, and Balasu means to use it rationally. To grow the trees, to save them, and even if you have to use the trees, then use it rationally. Indiscriminate use or felling of the trees is not allowed. So this was their motto. Then again, at number 4, I have discussed about the Silent Valley movement, which happened in 1973, and an organization which was termed as KSSP, Kerala Shastri Sahitya Parishad. They came forward, they took this project, this movement under their aegis, and this was to save the Silent Valley from a hydroelectric plant on river Kunti Puja, or you can say Kunti Puja. So Silent Valley movement is again a tropical area, and this has been termed as Silent Valley because they say that even after the night falls, you cannot hear any sound over there. Normally, when you go in between nature, in the trees, you will hear the sound of insects and cicadas and all that. But this term was given by a Britisher, and when he accidentally discovered this area and in Kerala, and when he went there, he found that no sound was heard even after the night falls. No cicadas were heard over there. It was complete silence. So he termed this area as the Silent Valley movement and the Silent Valley. So you need to know about such areas which are still protected and conserved in the form of ecology. Then we come over to the Jharkhand movement, which is also known as the Jangal Bachao Andolan. And it was a result of the greed game political populism in 1982. What happened was that the government tried to clear the sal forests which had sal trees on it, and they wanted to plant teak trees over there because the wood of teak is costlier. So the tribals of Singhbhumi, they tried to save the sal forests, the clearing of the forests for growing of teak plantation, and that is why we call it as a result of the greed game political populism. Then a very notable, very famous movement, that is Narmada Bachao Andolan or the Narmada Bachao movement. You might have definitely come across this. The leading names in this movement were Medha Patkar, supported by people like Baba Amte and Arundhati Roy and so many other names, and they tried to save the river Narmada. There was a Sardar Sarovar Dam on the river Narmada, and this dam was, the government decided to increase the height of the Sardar Sarovar Dam. And this increase, the height increase would have resulted in the displacement of so many people living in the villages around the river. So you can say that though this was about the saving of the people from being displaced from their houses, but still creating of a dam or raising the height of a dam would have also resulted in changing of the direction of river Narmada and in its flow. So you can also connect this movement and talk of this movement as an ecological movement. Then last but not least, Tihri Dam movement, and the protests started in 1990s, and they wanted to stall the building of a dam on river Bhagirathi in Tihri. And Sundarlal Bahuguna, he became a part of the Chipko movement fame. He became a part of this movement. And in 2000, locals also joined the movement full force. They used to stay there. They used to be on night watch. They used to, fast in front of the houses of the officers who were appointed there for building of the Tihri Dam. So Indians, what I want to point through these movements is that Indians have been, since ancient times, Indians have been very much vocal as far as conservation of nature is concerned. And I would come over to Ramchandra Guha after this, and I would talk about him, what he says. Why are we suffering from what we are suffering from today? So, this is not an exhaustive list that I have prepared over here. Pioneers of eco-criticism in India. So, we have Chandi Prasad Bhatt of the Chipko movement. Then we have Ramchandra Guha, we have Vanna Shiva, Arundhati Roy, Amitav Ghosh, And as I said, that this is not an exhaustive list, neither it is in any chronological order. So I would like to begin. These are the famous names, you can say, who talk about ecology and who write about ecology and who also point out the problems that we are facing in the present times and what are the solutions to that. So coming over first to Chandi Prasad Bhatt, he is a Gandhian environmentalist and a social activist also. And he founded the Dasholi Gram Swarajya Sangh, which was later named as Mandal in Gopeshwar, 1964. And this Sangh or this Mandal was the one who initiated the Chipko movement, to which Sundarlal Bahuguna also attached himself. He received Raymond Magsaysay Award for Community Leadership in 1992 for the role he played in the Chipko movement, and he is known more for his social ecology. He has written works in Hindi, which I have not mentioned over here, but I would definitely like you to try and find out if the translations are available, and if not available, some of you can venture into translating his works, because his works are definitely worth reading as far as ecology or eco-criticism is concerned in India. So I'm talking of 3 works. I'm not going to go into the details of the works, just a little bit about them. The first work in English is The Future of Large Projects in the Himalaya, and it discusses about the exploitation of the Himalayas by the government, by the people, and their capacity to sustain the exploitation. How much energy is left in Himalaya to bear its exploitation. He also talks about the Alaknanda flooding due to the cutting of the trees in the Alaknanda valley, and also discusses about the Chipko movement. Another book by him is Ecosystem of Central Himalaya, where he talks about the ecology that we find in the Central Himalayas, and the third book is on Chipko movement, and you can understand what it must be having within it, the reasons why the Chipko movement started, how it progressed, what were the results, what are the solutions of such kind of problems. Such type of things have been mentioned over here. Now coming over to Ramchandra Guha, and you can call him as one of the earlier pioneers of environmental movement in India. Ramchandra Guha, when we talk about our Vedas and Purans, he is very much against the idea that the environmental concerns or the idea of preserving the ecology or treating nature as sacred is written down in the ancient scriptures. He is very much against it, and that is why he says that he considers Gandhi ji as the first environmentalist of India. I would like to first explain what I just said about him. In one of his lectures, he says that definitely the Vedas and the Purans and the ancient scriptures of India, they talk about nature, they talk about ecology, but we cannot call them as a society which was inclined towards nature conservation, because he gives the example of the fire that was ignited by the Pandavas. This is a story in the Mahabharata. The Khandav Prasth area or the Indraprasth area, So the Pandav, they making a palace for themselves, they burned down the Khandav. So he says that if we find descriptions and ecological concerns in the ancient scriptures, there are evidences of how the ancient people, they destroyed nature as well. So, and that is why he says that we will have to forget about all those, all that is mentioned in the Veds and the Purans, and we will have to come over to the modern literature. And what he says is that whatever we are facing is the result of the mad race that we have been following after the industrialization. And whatever we are facing, whatever problems we are facing, it is because of the industrialization, because we have followed the Western idea of development, we have followed the Western idea of industrialization, and we have ignored our system, our tradition in this. I have taken from his article, Ideological Trends in Indian Environmentalism, where he identifies 3 strands of the environmental movement, and these 3 strands are Crusading Gandhian, Crusading Gandhian, the second one is Appropriate Technology, and third one is Ecological Marxists. So in Crusading Gandhian, he upholds pre-capitalist and pre-colonialist village community as an example of ecological and social harmony, and summarily rejects modern way of living. He also talks in this Crusading Gandhian, he says that the mantra of Gandhi ji to establish a Ram Raj should not be taken metaphorically, but it should be taken literally if we want to preserve our nature and to avoid the catastrophes that we are facing these days. Coming over to the second point, he says appropriate technology, which strives for a modern and traditional technological traditions and strives for a working synthesis of agriculture and industry. He does not deny that we don't need technology, but the technology should be so that it should be in synthesis with agriculture, where agriculture should be the leader. He talks of adopting technological and social alternatives to the present model of urban industrial development. He is not against it, but he says that the technology, only those technologies should be adopted which do not harm the environment or do not disturb the harmony between the society and the nature. Then third strand is of the ecological Marxists, who closely identified with the people's science movement such as the KSSP, the Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad, that I talked about when I was discussing about the movements in India. Like KSSP was initially formed for taking science to people, but it broadened to include environmental protection, who relied on confrontational tactics. So it was, the people science movements were developed or they were initiated in order to bring science closer to human beings. But later, when they saw the destructive nature of science, they moved towards environmental protection. They broadened their area to environmental protection, and they included the Naxalite and radical Christian movement. They talked about this, they included this because about Naxalism. The tribals, they protest against the use of their land for industrial purposes because it brings inequality and further they also talk of environmental degradation because of that. But ecological Marxists, they preferred socialism over ecological socialism. They say that first comes socialism, that the people should be provided for. The one lacuna that this point has is that the ecological Marxists, they prefer socialism over ecological socialism. They say that people must be provided for first, and then the environment should be looked into. Okay. Now I come over to Vandana Shiva. She's a very prominent name as far as environmentalism is concerned, and you must have definitely heard about her. She initially studied as a physicist, and she has taken her PhD degree from Ontario, Canada. And then she came to India. She worked at big institutes, but when she saw what was happening around, she left her job and she started working as an environmental activist. She is against the Green Revolution as it resulted in destruction of the ecosystem and in loss of soil fertility, because Green Revolution speaks about the use of chemicals and fertilizers to improve the quality of soil, but she says that it is not helpful. She focuses on organic farming because she trains the farmers for organic farming. And she says that this is all a result of the Green Revolution, which focuses on the use of pesticides and chemicals for increasing the produce and for improving the fertility of the soil. Rather, it results in the loss of soil fertility. This is something which, if you remember in my earlier in part 2, I had talked about Rachel Carson's book, The Silent Springs, where she talks about the use of DDT on she talks about use of DDT and how it results in environmental degradation. Again, coming back to Vandana Shiva, she talks against the hold of corporations on farming and calls patenting of agricultural produce as biopiracy. She terms it as biopiracy, and is also against the seed monopoly by GMO corporations. You must have heard about that this is a GMO labeled mango, this is a GMO labeled brinjal. So she is very much against this because it leads to seed monopoly, and this further leads to an economic imbalance amongst the farmers and the corporations. Vandana Shiva is also very much known for her contribution towards ecofeminism, and she has written a book on ecofeminism along with Maria Miles in 1993. This book has essays by Vandana Shiva as well as Maria Miles, and in which Shiva talks of a strong connection between ecology and women, and says the Western patriarchy has failed to cite the interconnectedness of women and nature. She blames the Western patriarchy for the imbalance, for the subjugation of nature as well as of women. But I must say that though this book is about ecofeminism, she has been criticized a lot for her articles in this book. People say that there are no novelty of ideas in the book, and some people have also blamed her for not acknowledging the works of the prominent and previous ecofeminists. But apart from this, she is an environmental activist, and her works are to be read further. There are many books. She has written about 20 books, which I have not listed over here. So you can do it at your leisure. Arundhati Roy, we know her by her Booker-winning book, The God of Small Things. She is also an environmental activist. She took part in the Narmada Bachao Andolan and talks about this in her book, The Greater Common Good, and calls the Narmada Valley project as India's greatest planned environmental disaster. She again, like Vandana Shiva, is against green revolution for bringing in chemicals and pesticides and thus disturbing the ecological balance. She even criticizes the World Bank for lending indiscriminately for building of dams, which further the environmental degradation. She says that the World Bank should look into such projects and what they are resulting in. So World Bank should not be blind to what they are, sponsoring, and they should look into such issues as what would be the result of such projects on the environment of that particular area or that particular country. Another book by Arundhati Roy, in Walking with the Comrades, Roy enumerates how tribal life was systematically dismantled to create space for multinational corporations. I hope you know that she went and stayed with the Naxalites, and there she tried to understand their problems, she talks about how their tribal life has been disturbed because of the government projects of bringing in the multinational companies in their areas. So leaving the socialist point of view of this movement, this definitely points out to how the clearing of the forests for the multinational companies, how severely it damages the environment and the ecological balance. So we must give her credit for this. Amitav Ghosh, we know him as a novelist. He won the Gyanpith Award in 2019. He has written many novels, but he has also written some non-fiction, which I have mentioned over here. His Countdown, he looks at the blind race among third world countries like India and Pakistan, ruining their economy and sustainable growth in the mad rush to become nuclear power. You know that every country these days are trying to accumulate as much nuclear power they can. And this is what Amitav Ghosh talks about, because yes, it makes you powerful, but what the consequences of such type of power results in, this is what he talks about in this book. And he says that we are into this mad rush of accumulating nuclear power or of becoming nuclear power without realizing how self-destructive the efforts are in order to become a nuclear power. Then we take up the Great Derangement, and as the title suggests it, he names the so-called progress, development, and growth as not an arrangement but a derangement. He says that it is a madness in the contemporary world where ecological depletion takes a back burner and the progress narrative blinds the world. We are running after progress, but progress on what cost? Jungle Nama, his recent work, it celebrates Bon Bibi, which you would come across in The Hungry Tide, his novel, The Forest Goddess. She is a mythological figure in the Sundarbans, which we have come across in The Hungry Tide, highlighting the medieval coexistence of animals, man and the vegetational world, how in the name of modernism we have created a logocentric world, predominantly humans exploiting the remaining two. After discussing the critical works, I am trying to point this out that is not an exhaustive list. We have more and more works on the topic, but I have taken just a few of them. Now, how ecology is represented in literature. So first I would like to start with the novels. You know that what our tradition has been. Our tradition is basically ecocentric. We were villages before. Gradually they started developing into cities, but still most of our population lives in the villages. And we also talk of nature in our ancient scriptures. So our tradition has been of nature worship, of giving respect to nature, of talking about nature. And this you can see in perhaps all the works that have been created by our writers. I don't say that all the ecological concerns can be found. It can just be portrayal, as when we were talking about the stages of eco-criticism, we talked about 3 stages, where the first is about portrayal, the second is about consciousness raising, and the third is about theory. So, and all 3 stages are definitely important. I said that the stage 2 is more important, but all 3 stages are important. So, nature portrayal, how nature has been described, how nature has been presented, or in case there is an absence of it. Because if you remember the definition that I gave from Professor Scott Slovic, he says that even the absence of nature, and why the absence is there, the social and political forces that annihilate or assail nature, any text that shows such a connection is also a book on ecology. So our tradition has been so that we talk about literature in either just in the foreground, or it is there in the backdrop, but nature is definitely there. So if we take up certain texts that we have already read in some time, at some point of time in our lives, in our academic lives, we talk of R.K. Narayan, Raja Rao, and Mulk Raj Anand. So as far as R.K. Narayan is concerned, the Man-Eater of Malgudi, it talks of ecological concerns. If we talk of Raja Rao, the Serpent and the Rope, Kantapur, and on the Ganga Ghat, they take up nature, and it is predominantly, discusses about nature. Coming over to Mulk Raj Anand, his works Two Leaves and a Bud, The Village, these are some of the works where he talks about nature. And I would like you to read more and more works on these 3 writers, where you find ecological concerns, or even if there is an absence, how that absence has been created in these works is a point of consideration. Coming over to Anita Desai, Fire on the Mountain, Cry the Peacock, it has ecological concerns in it. Kamla Markande, Nectar in a Sieve, how she talks about nature as a preserver as well as a destroyer. Ruskin Bond, No Room for a Leopard, how the leopard is, is made to suffer because of human interference. Kiran Desai, Hullabaloo in the Guava Orchard. It talks how nature pacifies you. Kiran Desai's Inheritance of Loss. She talks how the Kanchenjunga mountain, it suffers because of the humans. Arundhati Roy, The God of Small Things, where she describes how the environment is, being destroyed by humans. Pankaj Mishra, The Romantics. Amitav Ghosh's The Hungry Tide, and even The Glass Palace, which I discussed in the earlier part of my novel, where he talks of Burma and how the forests of Burma were cleared for bringing wood from there to lay down railway lines here in India, and how the elephants were exploited for this purpose, how the river was also exploited for this purpose. Pankaj Seksaria, he's a novelist who has come out with 2-3 novels on the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and how the ecology is being disturbed by human interference over there. Then we have Survi Sharma Kumar, Voices in the Valley. Again an eco-critical reading, but again I would like to mention over here that this is not an exhaustive list. There are many writers, because this is our tradition, you see, of discussing nature in our works. Either it's just a description, it's just a portrayal, or the nature takes an important, it has an important role to play in the works. Coming over to poetry, again not an exhaustive list, some poets I have mentioned over here, and talking about Toru Dutt, her poem Our Casuarina Tree, and Sita talks of nature. Sarojini Naidu, you know, she has written a lot about nature. Rabindranath Tagore, he has in his poems, nature abounds like anything. Then Sri Aurobindo Ghosh, Nissim Ezekiel in some of his poems like Squirrel and Sparrows, poet, lover and bird watcher. He talks of nature, though basically he is not a nature poet, but in some of his poems he has talked about nature. Then we talk of A.K. Ramanujam, his poem Snake, and there must be definitely others. K.K. and Daruwala, a boat ride along the Ganga, where he talks about how the Ganga has been, polluted. Arun Kolatkar, a post-colonial writer, his Jejuri poems, they describe, some of the poems talk about how animals are mistreated, how the nature has been exploited, and he even calls a place where bitch is residing with her, there are few insects, bitch with her puppies residing, and he calls that place as better than a temple. So, and Jayant Mahapatra, in his poems, he talks of river Mahanadi in many of his works. I have skipped the slide on drama because definitely if we there have been many dramatists in India and very prominent ones. So with this I end my lecture, and thank you for your patience in hearing me. I might have faltered in between my lecture, so I would definitely like to apologize to you for any inconvenience caused to you during the lecture. Thanks a lot and all the best to you. Thank you.